How is it possible the media ignores this?
Let me steal from Bill Clinton's speech last night. Tea Party violence, 0. Occupy, well, go ahead and count up the charges. I mean, we saw rape, robbery, I mean, you name it, assaults on police officers, but their rage was understandable. Yet, you couldn't even find someone who wrote a parking ticket in law enforcement at a Tea Party, but the Tea Party's violent, it's racist, it's sexist. I mean, it's all of these evil things. We heard that the Republican Party's platform is from the last century, and we saw what happened to Mia Love. I mean, that was absolutely disgusting. Some of the things that were put up on Twitter and Wikipedia after Mia Love gave her speech in Tampa.
How can the Democrats even claim to be tolerant at this point?
Well, it's tolerate me. It's tolerate me.
What do you think they mean when they say tolerant?
I think it's tolerant of groups that they choose. I think they look at groups that they consider in the past to have been discriminated against, or groups they believe need a little sympathy in the public square. Then the lesson is, well, come into this tent, but then you could be as mean as you want to everybody else. Once you're in our tent, once you're one of our protected groups, you are pretty much free to move about the cabin and say what you want to anybody else.
Let me give you an example of, I think, what you're talking about. I was watching CNN this morning, and Senator Dick Durbin was on, and they were talking about Mitt Romney, and he said, well, look, he's funded by 17 old, angry white men. And I just sat there and listened, how is that okay for him to say? And I think you're attempting to explain that. How is it okay for him to call Mitt Romney's funders nothing more than, well, not nothing more, old and angry, but also white men?
Well, it's like sexist attacks on conservative women are put into context. They're from comedians. You know, this is an isolated thing. Unless NOW or Planned Parenthood and NARAL says it's offensive, it's not offensive. It's purely academic. You know better than anyone.
Every honest liberal SC would have to completely just disown all of this, right? But I don't hear a lot of that going on.
Well, a couple of things. You can take outliers on the extremes in both parties, people who say awful things. I mean, check my Twitter feed. I get a ton of them. Just yesterday, a bunch of people were
But these are Democratic Party chairs for states.
Right. That's what the distinction I'm making. So the woman who wants to kill Mitt Romney and the Daily Show guy, I don't know. But when you look at what happened on the floor of the DNC, there is so little tolerance for the innocuous middle anymore that they're booing God. Literally booing God on the floor of the DNC. And atheists are all up in arms that the DNC caved and put God back in their platform. If you look at the lineup of far-left speakers that they had on there and sort of controversial politicos like Rahm Emanuel and Jennifer Granholm, if you can imagine, I think I may have said this before, someone like a pro-life Democrat like Bob Casey Sr. or Sargent Shriver ever getting an invite to speak at this DNC? Absolutely not. There is no more intellectual tolerance left on the left. And it's not just these outlier kooks. Now it is the party's embrace of this complete sort of
disingenuous.
Well, there's a double standard. It's hypocrisy, of course, but it's incredibly overt now, this intolerance for intellectual diversity.
So I have to say, I think that we often see both parties saying, we're the party of freedom, we're the party of tolerance, as long as it's in the interest of our party to be that way. What I think is ironic, though, is that a lot of groups, for instance, labor, women, these are groups that the government systematically used to govern against. And now, instead of saying, okay, let's set the record straight, government shouldn't be involved in blocking labor unions and women's right to vote, we will use the government to then force other people to do what these groups want. So now labor unions, people can be forced to be put into a labor union. And other groups will try and use the coercive power of government to get what they want. So the very thing that we used against them, they want to use to hurt others, which I think happens within both parties.
Amy, do you see this equivalence, though? I don't think that's really a fair way to look at this. I think that Republicans live in constant fear of being called racist, of being called anti-women.
Yes.
All of these things.
Yes.
And so there's a whole lot more internal housekeeping that goes on. They won't allow this to stand for a second. Meanwhile, on the Democrat side of things, people get away with things. They're allowed to say things that are just recklessly...
Democrats, they'll call Democrats unpatriotic, anti-God. I mean, a lot of Democrats are patriotic and do believe in God, and they may have different religious backgrounds, but
calling someone unpatriotic, though, is more of a political discussion. Calling someone a racist is completely demeaning their character and saying they're a terrible person.
Barack Obama clean, bright, and articulate. He would not be tapped to be vice presidential candidate on the ticket. And for many years, I have not Googled myself, because I've seen the slurs, the attacks, the House N-word attached to me. And these are supposed to be from, you know, the people who are
open-minded,
tolerant
right?
and open and diverse and all of that. But, you know, and I've thought a lot about it. And so often it seems to me that it's, you know, the boomer generation, they like to say they're on the right side of history and that they believe that they own cultural progress. And anybody who is against that progress, conservatives, they should be destroyed. They should be mowed over and plowed over. And that is in the name of progress. And I've also seen, it seems to me, sort of juvenile, this idea of Republicans represent my parents, the old white guys who always said no to me, and to become an adult, I had to move them out of the way so that I could progress myself, you know, philosophically and politically. And you just see it over and over.
It's constantly traitorous, right? The betrayal of not being liberal. You're a traitor to your generation if you're a young conservative. You're a traitor to your gender if you're a woman conservative, to your race, to your ethnicity. Barney Frank was just out saying that log cabin Republicans, which are gay rights advocates who are also Republican, are the Uncle Toms of their party. I mean, there is absolutely no tolerance for someone who should technically be a liberal and is not, and has the sort of daring to object to that political philosophy. Not to mention the whole undertones of what liberals think liberals should look like.
This is a perfect